Today I was going to do a video around digital twins. There's a lot of hype behind them at the moment and a lot of vendors offering services to help organizations create their digital twin. But I think what's missing for me in a lot of the conversation is the so what? When you've got your digital twin, and what are you supposed to do with it? So today I'm going to talk about process improvement. I'm going to talk about the opportunities that can be enabled by the implementation and through the implementation of a digital twin in your organization. My name's Chris Buxton, and I help organizations make the most of their data and technology enabled opportunities. So when we start to talk about digital twins, what we're really referring to is a virtual manifestation or a virtual representation of your organization. They originated really in manufacturing as a way of representing a production process in technology and data so that you could identify opportunities for improvement and see how your organization was operating. In a lot of organizations, though, when we think about production, we're producing information, we're producing data. So the same logic around the flow of information through an organization to produce an outcome still applies, I think. So digital twins are as relevant within an information organization as they are within a factory manufacturing process. And I think because of that, they present a lot of opportunities for us to think about process improvement, to think about how do we move from we've got to re-engineer the entire end-to-end process to something a little bit more manageable where we can start to pick off smaller pieces of work and incrementally improve our operations. So today I'm going to talk about the theory of constraints. So it's a lean process improvement methodology that allows you to start to look at the incremental processes within your organization and start to incrementally improve within a robust framework and process elements that allow you to do that. So really, what is the theory of constraints? So in basic terms, it means you look at your process and you find the biggest constraint within your process, and then you fix it. And when you fix that constraint, then that's no longer the biggest. There will be a new biggest constraint. And by doing that, you start to pick off the constraints in your organization one at a time. It allows you to prioritize and it allows you to work in a more incremental way of continual improvement within your organization. It's made up of three distinct areas. So you've got the 5 process areas of steps, which is a continual improvement cycle, which I'll come on to shortly. It's made up of the thinking processes, and I think this is where digital twins really has a lot to offer within this process. And then underlining this is a different way of thinking about accounting. I think a lot of time in organizations, accounting is about the cost of assets and the cost of delivery. Within the theory of constraints, that changes, and we'll come on to what that really means shortly. But the idea behind it is an incremental iterative process for continual improvement. So it's 5 steps that the theory of constraint talks about. First step is to identify the constraint. So this really is looking at across your process, what is the biggest constraint, what is the biggest bottleneck within that process. And I'm sure if you looked at any of your business processes, you could identify many constraints across your organization, whether that's people, skills, technology, process elements, policies, and all these different things. But the idea is you identify the biggest one. Now, I wouldn't spend too long doing this, to be honest, because it is a continual improvement. So if you spend too long trying to work out which is your biggest constraint, that's opportunity cost. I think in adopting this, it's thinking, what is the biggest constraint that's front of mind at the moment that I can get on and fix? And in the meantime, you will then go on and identify a whole bunch of others. But it's about getting started, and it's about beginning the process. So once you've identified that constraint, theory of constraints talks about exploiting the constraint. So what this really means is do what you can within the environment that you've got today using existing skills, technology, resource, and other elements to remove that constraint. So that might have an impact or it might not. But it allows you to look at improvement without requiring you to go off and look at large scale investment or big pieces of work. And it allows you to pick off what you can do and what you can control as an individual within a team. I think this is a very good way to allow your teams to get ownership of their own process, because it allows them to work within an existing financial or corporate constraint, but gives them influence within how they do business themselves. The next step is to subordinate and synchronize all the other processes within that end-to-end process around that constraint. So for example, if you've got a production process where there is one element that takes longer than any of the others, what's going to happen there is all of the preceding processes are going to build up a backlog going into that slower process because it takes longer to execute. And then all of the processes after that are going to end up waiting for product to reach them, or information or decisions or whatever to reach them. So they're all out of sync. So it sounds sort of counterintuitive, but if you've got one process that's running slower than everything else, then slow down everything else to synchronize it all together. Because if you don't do that, what it really means is you're throwing more money and resource into those other process areas, but actually you're not getting any benefit from that. So you might as well slow them down, synchronize them to your constraint, and make sure everybody's working to the same rhythm and the same throughput. What you can then do is look at the next stage, which is to elevate the performance of the constraint. And there you start looking at what are the other interventions, what is the investment, what is the increasing resourcing, what is the other things I can do to improve performance around that constraint. And then the final stage is repeat. So you do it all again, and you keep doing it all again until that's no longer your largest constraint within your production process. It's a pretty simple lean process that allows you to iterate through your constraints and continually improve the way that you're doing business and the way that you're operating in quite an agile and incremental way. And when you align that with the theory around an adaptive organization, I think it really gives you a nice way of breaking work down into more manageable chunks so that you can then start to improve your organization without requiring large scale investment and budget bids and other income before you can actually get into something. Now, that's where the next stage really and the thinking processes come in, because within the theory of constraint, it identifies a number of thinking processes that really are related to modeling your current environment, modeling the potential future environment, and understanding the potential impact of interventions that you might put in. Well, that's a digital twin in a nutshell. I think part of the issue in all of these activities is that when people do process improvement, they document the process at the start, they document what they think, and then once they've done that initiative, they drop it and walk away. So if you want to improve again, you've got to start again, you start documenting again. The idea of a digital twin is it's a continual representation of your organization, so it endures. So you can continue to do the improvement as an iterative activity, firm in the knowledge that you've got this digital twin as a foundation that gives you that thinking and gives you that information you need to identify your constraint, model what you're going to do about it, and then allow you to execute and understand the impact of that execution as you go through. And that's the goal of the digital twin, because that answers the so what, because you can have a digital twin. It can tell you where all your information is going. It tell you your costs. It can tell you where it's going wrong. But ultimately, it should be around driving decisions. And that's the whole point of data in organizations. It's to support decision making. It's not to simply exist because it's a great idea to have a whole bunch of data. It must drive decisions, and digital twins are exactly the same. If you're going to have a digital twin, the most important part is not necessarily the setup of a digital twin and how you're going to maintain it. It's what are you going to do with it? What are the decisions you're going to make? And have you got the processes running after that decision to do something about the problem? I think the most frustrating thing for a lot of staff is that they will identify constraints, they'll identify what you can do about it, come up with a lot of ideas, and then nobody does anything because there's no execution process to do anything with it. Digital twins, you have to have that execution process, because the last part of it is the different way that it thinks about accounting and what is important to the organization. So because really the theory of constraints came from a manufacturing basis, it looks at investment and assets and cost in a different way. So the most important thing for the theory of constraint is throughput. So it's productivity. That's its number one measure. And basically every other measure is subordinate to that productivity or throughput measure. And the whole idea of the constraint is to maximize throughput. The next measure that it looks at is investment. Now, investment is about how much money is tied up in the assets and the things that you need to produce that throughput. So I think this is a really, really interesting one, because if to maximize your throughput, you have to go out and buy a huge new software platform and a huge new capability, you're increasing that investment baseline quite significantly. So that investment has to significantly improve your throughput to balance out. Otherwise, it's had a negative impact on your process. So that's quite an interesting way of looking at it, because I think quite often when you go into process improvements, the first thing everybody says is, I need a new system. Well, the reality is you probably don't. So probably the system you've got at the moment is working perfectly well. What you haven't got is a robust process improvement activity where you can continually tweak, look at your policies, look at your process, and look at those other elements that you can influence to change and improve performance of that process. And then the final component of accounting is the operating expense. How much time does your organization and how much money is spent on producing that output? And this is the resource part of the conversation, really, because your investment is looking at your assets and your operating expense really is looking at your people and how much time do they spend. And the idea is you're going to increase throughput, you're going to reduce investment, and you're going to reduce operating expense. And that's your three accounting bases for your constraint conversation. I think when you think like that, it helps, I think, when you think about solutions, because as I say, if to increase your throughput by a significant amount, you have to significantly increase investment or resourcing, that's not actually a viable performance improvement, because your accounting is totally skewed at that point. So you have to think about solutions in a slightly different way. So in a nutshell, that gives us the why for the digital twin. It's all about giving organizations the information they need to allow them to make choices to improve. If you found this talk interesting, subscribe to my channel and click the bell so you'll be notified next time I post a video. My name's Chris Buxton, and I help organizations make the most of their data and technology-enabled opportunities.